wrapping up Robin Hood at the time, and he came to me and said, I've got the Alien movie that I'm starting up next. Are you interested? And it's kind of one of those like, wow, I can't believe I just got asked by Ridley personally, do I want to do his next science fiction movie?
The visual effects work just seemed to be spread everywhere. I mean, there were a lot of things that were ambiguous as to how much Arthur could build, how much Ridley could shoot practically, and it was clear that there was going to be pretty major visual effects shots.
He really just said, let's go into it thinking, here's the world I want to show, and here's the things that we couldn't do on the first one. Let's show it for real this time, and let's make these grand environments and giant spaceships.
I'll never be the same again. I mean, green screen has proved to be phenomenally well done between Weta and MPC in London. Fundamentally, these two companies have tackled what amounts to almost 1,300 of very sophisticated effect shots. Lived absolutely up to my expectations of what was digitally drawn 13 months prior. And if in doubt, they'd say, what about? I said, I want it like that. I'd show this big, glossy, literally photographic version of what I wanted. Just keep tapping it. I'm a great believer in doing my R&D and sticking with my R&D.
As far as cooperation between digital and practical effects on the film went, we had an amazing group of people doing practical and visual effects, and we constantly talked to each other, and it's very hard to see the takeover between a practical and a digital shot.
The opening prologue was going to be a full digital engineer because we knew he was going to decay so much that it probably wasn't going to be realistic. Right from the beginning, we previs that sequence. We looked at the art department concepts. We had an idea what he wanted to do. And then it was just a matter of what the final look would be. So it was great reference all across the board.
Ridley shot the whole performance live for real with a real actor, and we shot clean plates without him, and Weta used the clean plates to recreate the CG version of the actor's performance. They matched the animation to his performance, and you could put the two side by side.
Ridley wanted a very aggressive taking over of his body. And we knew we had to get into a molecular level to see, his component parts were being torn apart, molecule by molecule by the infection of the goo. So the main things that we were looking at is firstly is grounding it in reality and using reference for each of the types of DNA. Because we have such a short amount of time to tell the story of the DNA getting infected, breaking apart, and then reforming and recombining to show Earth DNA, we had to make the designs of the different DNA quite different and quite graphical, quite illustrative of what they were. So the engineer's DNA, we thought, well, this needs to be quite sinister, but we know it's going to get infected, and the infection has to look, more messed up than the engineer's DNA. So, we used quite a light color palette for the engineer's DNA, and then the infection comes on, it's very dark and it's very melted looking, and starts to distort and then break apart the engineer's DNA. Ridley actually said to us, for this section, it has to feel like war in there. The DNA is just being torn apart and just ripping itself apart in as many different ways as possible.
The one thing about the particles that Ridley really wanted to kind of try and hit in terms of the way that they moved, he wanted to get a sense that they weren't just falling off him. He wanted to give a sense that they were actually had a little bit of intelligence almost. He said we should look at starlings, and he saw some great footage of starlings, the way that they flock and move, and really liked that sense of motion, and that's what Weta ended up using as a reference for how those would animate.
It always had to escalate, so each shot needed to be much more advanced than the one before. It got to the stage where eventually parts of the engineer would just tear open, and there's a shot where, his back just opens right up, so you can see his spine. Being able to contribute ideas like that, and you'd put them in front of Ridley and say, well, how about this? How about we just have his back tear open, and to have him come back and go, yeah, that's great. It's just fantastic to know that some of the ideas that Weta created are, getting into the film.
Ridley loves to shoot as much practically, and pretty much for everything that we had in the film there was a practical version of that he could shoot with, but at some point we always knew that we were going to have to take over to CG. There's the spaceships, the Prometheus. That was a given that we were going to have to do that. There were so many scenes, so we said, well, let's invest all the money into building really great CG versions of these ships. The Prometheus design of it came purely from the art department. Steve Berg and Ben Proctor were responsible for building and detailing the ship to a point where we had really good approved concepts from Ridley.
He actually built the model himself and used that to give to MPC, who was hired to actually create it for the feature.
It was a great opportunity to show that the current potential and what we could do with computer graphics on spaceships. We were given some very cool concept designs which had a fair amount of detail, but through the film and through the previs and getting the storyboards for Ridley, we realised there were shots that were extremely close, so we had an awful lot of coverage of it. So we had the design based from the concept guys, and we built it to that stage, and then we had to go in and in and in, closer and closer.
You can zoom into the cockpit. We have a rough interior. You can sort of see the seats there. It's a very, very heavy model. It is a very, very large ship, so it looks like a jet fighter sometimes. It's a VTOL ship, so it can do vertical takeoff and landing, and it's got these 4 massive legs that are like the engines. So it's like, well, we have to make it look cool, but at the same time, it cannot really be super agile because then it takes the size away. And all the landing is like we did it as slow as possible without making it look boring. So it's agile, at the same time it has to look massive.
Selling the scale of it, you want to feel something massive is landing on this dusty planet, and we had to do this huge amount of dust raised by the ground. So really the scale of that shot is given by how the dynamic of the dust and the tiny points and the tiny rocks are moving.
When we get in close, you need to see the detail, and there's so much texture time went into adding scale to the ship to make it feel like it was big enough.
Maybe we need just a sense of a little bit more specular in some of these areas that are quite smooth. Just very subtly change of value, in the highlights here.
That was a big challenge, definitely, for building it, because it's a task that you could just go on and on and on. But the final result is great, and MPC did a fantastic job with that.
Planet from above, as you fly in, Ridley found a particular moon off Jupiter, so that became the model for the gas giant. We shot things like ink swirling to get like nice fluid patterns, and he wanted to have the rings, so we analysed Saturn rings but tried to do something slightly different. Ridley had gone and talked to some NASA guys about what it should really be out there in space, what it should be on the planets, and he had all this feedback that he was very excited about. The planet environment was incredible. Steve Messing was one of the concept artists responsible for most of the planetscapes. It was really clear that it was going to, even if something real was going to be shot, it was going to need to be heavily manipulated. So the whole planet environment was going to require quite a lot of visual effects work to join different landscapes together, add atmospherics and weather and lightning and things like that. Ridley's main first port of call was that it was going to be terrible weather on this planet, and that was our basic brief. We put a lot of effort into designing with Ridley. All the landscape was kind of based on him really loving Wadi Rum in Jordan. There was a photo that Ridley had found somewhere of some really interesting mountain landscape, and he'd drawn in some pyramids in the middle of that valley that he found, basically. And that became kind of the thing that we wanted to create. I went to Jordan with an aerial unit, an NPC's supervisor, Charlie Henley, and we shot thousands and thousands of stills. We shot loads of plates there as well. So there's some real plates of Jordan untouched, and then there are the areas where you see a sandy desert as the ground. We've replaced that with digital versions of what we shot in Iceland.
Hey, baby.
The creature work was, there's a good variety of creature work. Neil Scanlon's team, the creature supervisor, had a number of tasks to create, and Hammerpede's a great example. Neil's team did a fantastic, fully animatronic version of the Hammerpede, puppeteered versions, things that could be wrapped around Millman's arm that we could, puppeteer for real, pull through. So, we shot most of that scene with the Hammerpede with a practical Hammerpede there for the whole time.
Really wanted to try and do things real first, and where it would fail, then he would want us to do it digitally.
There were certain limitations of things he couldn't do. The way that the mouth kind of uncurls and opens up, we could only see it from behind, sort of, doing kind of this, and MPC ended up doing the frontal version where it unfurls and opens up, and then we cut to the rear view, which is practical. So we're cutting from practical to CG a number of times, and then obviously there's a point where the head gets cut off. And at that point, that's where we just take what he had and it's like, okay, Now we go CG, we've got to regrow a new head. That head's got to then burrow into the acid burn hole that's in Milburn's arm, and once it gets into his helmet, that's all down to us to take over. And Raceful did a great performance in reacting to something that he had no idea really what it was going to be doing, and he knew it was going to end up kind of being rammed down his throat. So he gave good performance for that, and really a pretty disgusting shot at the end of it. It was great.
Oh, that's horrible.
Ooh.
Ooh, I don't like that. Well, I do, but there's just far too many Freudian interpretations right there.
Medpod, what a great sequence that. I mean, truly disgusting, and that was a great moment in the script, and it's like, wow, this is going to be cool.
Scene 108, the Medpod. The Medpod was the first thing that I saw any previs for, or anything of the film. I just saw the previs sequence of Shaw entering the Medpod. It cuts her open, it pulls this thing out, it starts screaming, she starts screaming, with blood going everywhere. That was my introduction to Prometheus. That was the first thing I saw, along with, we are hoping for a PG-13 rating.
Really wanted it to be quite graphic as well. We did quite a heavy previs on this sequence. In fact, the team from Halon did a great job of prevising the whole sequence, and we prevised it as an R-rated version, and we prevised it as a PG-13 version.
The Medpod is actually one of the most exciting sequences to work on, because it is very analogous to the chest-bursting scene in the original Alien. So we really took a lot of care to make it look as real and as gruesome as we possibly could.
Weta picked up that sequence and just did a great job with doing great CG robotic arms that are interacting with her. The whole scanning motion, the laser cutting, the spreading, and the claw that comes in to pull out the placenta. That's all sort of full CG work at that point.
There's a lot of subtle things going on through the sequence. Firstly, Numi's actually quite a proficient belly dancer. And what we've done is put some enhancements onto that, so you can see the trilobite just nudge against her flesh from the inside and put the odd bulge in.
The sequence is incredible. And Neil Scanlon's team was just gave us the most incredible practical things to work with. I mean, fully animatronic baby trilobite with a placenta and a placental sac that's full of goo, and it was great. And there were some really good things.
Having the on-set reference that Ridley shot gave us a lot of confidence to know what he wanted and be able to replicate that and be able to deliver something that we knew he'd be happy with.
The staples are brilliant. We talked about that, with Ridley, the practicalities of what really would be in terms of futuristic surgery. It's like, well, you've got this fantastic Medpod machine that can do, any number of things. Yeah, he still wants staples, but he just loved the idea of staples. And it's just that thing of seeing that staple gun gets going, chunk, 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 and sticking staples in her stomach, just brilliant. That baby trilobite grows really quickly, and I remember a moment when we went over to Neil's creature shop when he was sculpting the original version of that. It was a lot smaller. I think we were all thinking it was a bit big already, and Neil said to Ridley, "I'm really concerned about the scale." And Ridley said, yeah, we should make it bigger. And Neil's like, oh, okay.
Neil essentially built pieces, gave us all the reference we needed, and we just gave that to Weta. And Weta built it, and then on top of that, they put their textures, because Ridley wanted that peeling, flaking skin look to it, which was really hard to do prosthetically. So, Weta finished all that off, and they had a great basis from Neil's stuff.
The battle between those two becomes this great struggle, and he's just overwhelmed. And Ridley had a great idea for that sequence that he should get his feet up on the door, and it's like, let's get his feet up on the door, and he's pulling back, and you get these sort of great shots where you really feel the struggle of him just trying to pull back away from this thing, and braced up against the door, and you get it's a great moment.
One of the main design aspects with the trilobite was to really get a sense of tension and strength in this quite squishy. He has a vertebrae, but down his tentacles he has no bones. So we needed to make sure that when his tentacles were very stretched out, that we had a sense of the musculature, and when it was compressed, when he's all squashed up, you see all the folds and wrinkles in the skin.
They had a real challenge to animate the trilobite's performance to match what Ian White was effectively doing with nothing. Definitely a tricky sequence, for sure, but again, that worked out really well in the end. The five-field creature, it was another beat that Ridley wanted an action sequence, and he conceived this as a short beat, just keep the pace of the film going, and we need an exciting action moment. And Fifield's transition into something slightly more alien, it was a bit ambiguous as to which way it was going to go.
The original intent was that any kind of gross movements, big running, jumping, things like that, would be a digital character, which they would build the one on set, which would be Sean Harris in some sort of prosthetic. We would go across that and just match to that, and then we'd do his digital motions so he could run properly how Ridley wanted. Ridley kind of wanted to take him more into an animal realm for his motion, so kind of baboonish, things like that.
There was one image that Ridley kept going back to, which was what he refers to as the baby head, and he kind of loved that image, and the design kind of really worked around that for a long time. And when we were getting closer to shooting, we were still not at the point where we had a final design for that.
When we started on Fifield, he was kind of big, kind of mean, kind of fast. That was pretty much all we had at the beginning. We ended up having the actor, Sean Harris, who played Fifield. He was in a prosthetic makeup and with sort of blackened up armor, and he ran through the entire sequence for us. Sean is incredibly intense as well. Anything you wanted, it was fine. The Fifield needs to be on fire. That's fine, set me on fire.
So I can design the whole thing, see it shot with the actor in makeup, full bore makeup, see how he does, and then do a combination of elements of the actor in relation to some digital enhancement, or not.
The first brief for Fifield was more or less human, more or less alien. Ridley was not locked in on the concept yet, so development continued at Weta. One of the big things was getting the right balance in the face, like between seeing the actor and maintaining the alien design on the outside, because he's transforming into the alien.
We sort of came up with this sort of withered remainder of a head. And then over time, and over a few design iterations, it became more important, and the head actually shrunk to the point where the outer exoskeleton head was actually quite tight to Fifield as a kind of distorted human.
While on the body side of things, really it comes more down to like proportions, limb length, like joints, the setup of the legs and the arms. So that show the alien features, but still enable us to do all the crazy movements he's gonna do.
There was times where it really was, when we were designing, it's like, I don't want something too monstrous, it's going to be quick, we're not going to see much. And
funny enough, the actor is winning. The digital enhancement is excellent, but it looks like a monster. Whereas the actor still looks like the actor. And what he does is pretty damn good. So both are done, but I'm able to look at them both and say, okay, which is the most effective?
A few comments were kind of like, we wanted to see Sean Harris. Like he's a great actor, and he provided a sense of character and realism to the shots. And they felt like seeing a CG character at that point of Sean Harris, it almost takes you out of the movie.
Weta did a fantastic job of creating a CG version of Fifield, and it's he's really disgusting. Ultimately, what you see in the final film is Sean Harris in makeup.
The Deacon's birth was another one of those sequences that people are waiting for.
I remember seeing early concepts of the Deacon, 6 to 8 months before we started shooting. We're not that far from what it was. I mean, it still had, no eyes and an elongated head.
Close your mouth. Close your mouth. Go on, close your mouth.
Up. Neil's team again, built a full prosthetic version of the Deacon for the birth of it from the engineer. And what you see in the film is something again where we shot everything practically as much as we could.
Really said, yeah, we'll do that for real, and we'll do as much as we can. So they puppeteered the Deacon, and he stands up and he starts to scream, and it was great. It was like they did a fantastic job. But it was just a couple things that we had to add to it. Weta essentially took a digital scan of the creature on set, the puppet, photographed it, and they built a version that matched to it exactly.
The Deacon's actually described as an ultramorph. It's come out of not a human, but from an engineer. So it's much bigger and stronger and much more developed than the xenomorph. But it's still just been born, and it's still finding its feet. So quite literally, when we first animated, it needed to sort of scrabble around as if it was a newly born, standing up for the first time animal to get him on his feet. And the first time, of course, he talks.
There's a lot of people thinking, well, it's just a precursor to what was designed as the alien, but the jaw is actually based on a goblin shark. Really loves that motion that it has, and it has this lower jaw that sort of unlatches, and there's a secondary jaw that comes out, and that's totally where the Deacon's jaw is based on. The scenes towards the end of the film when the Prometheus is taking off and the Juggernaut is taking off, we see the Juggernaut for the first time. For me, it's probably the best action sequence in the film. It's long, there's lots happening, there's a lot of drama, and it's the first time that we really see the Juggernaut in detail, emerging out of the silo. Shaw is kind of running up the hill out of the way. You see this thing emerging behind it. It's a fantastic moment.
Going into it, he always knew that it was going to be a big event. We had talked about doing a miniature for it because we knew we could get pieces of it. But we were worried because of the amount of detail in that ship, and it's so complicated to build, we'd get 1 or 2 takes and we wouldn't be happy.
MPC did some fantastic CG destruction, and they sold me on the idea that these guys can do it.
The original derrick was the basis for the current Juggernaut that we built. What Ridley wanted to do in this film was bring in a much higher level of detail and scale.
The Juggernaut was a real difficult one to get the scale of, and it's 1,000 foot in diameter. How much sort of detail do you get on something of this sort of size? And of course, obviously, the Juggernaut has a very specific design that we were trying to maintain from the original Alien, so we had to go in and put so much of that little piping detail work around the exterior. The whole Juggernaut had so much detail to it to maintain the huge scale that it is.
One of the biggest challenges was actually understanding the scale of the Juggernaut and being able to have the cameraman visualize that. When we brought it back to MPC and analysed the shots and laid out in post-viz, we found the Juggernaut was almost always completely out of frame.
I'm very happy with the sequence that occurs towards the end, because a lot of this is on paper, and you draw it and think, well, if the Juggernaut was rammed by the Prometheus, because the Prometheus has to use itself as a missile to bring it down, and in so doing, Yannick, the crew, and who is left, Chance and Ravel, will sacrifice themselves for the good of Earth.
It's that moment where we're into some pretty big effects work, and that whole sequence is a big one for us. The great crumpling motion as the nose of the Prometheus rams into the Juggernaut.
The way we crumple our ship against the other one to make it hold and the strength and to make it look like there's things inside. We have our own destruction tool here at MPC, and we just model like invisible objects inside that's supposed to be the structure to help it maintain form while it's being crushed. Luckily, inside the ship, there's not much stuff modeled in the side, so the explosion comes in pretty quick and helps us hide the hollowness of the whole ship.
We pull back, and we're back with Shaw and Vickers on the ground, and they're witnessing the explosion up in the sky, and then the debris starts raining down, and then we're into just absolute mayhem.
The Prometheus just explodes into billions of pieces, just like poof, in the air, and then that's all the pieces that we have to bring back in the ground. It just explodes, and lots of little debris hitting, and they escape a few while they're running. All these pieces are trying to hit them, and they just dodge them.
Of course, it doesn't end there. The Juggernaut falls to Earth like a giant horseshoe and starts to roll.
This is post-viz. That's how we took the plate, and in animation department we made a rough version of what it will look like when it's all rendered. All this is real, and then you get some added extra pinnacles. They call pinnacles these little formations. They're like volcanic rocks. So you can see the explosion elements there. You can see the meteorites we added. That's the Juggernaut. And you can see we've got the pyramids in the background, the body row. It's like a virtual environment.
And I always thought, that's a great idea, but can we pull it off? So applying my boards to their designs of the Juggernaut, suddenly the whole thing starts to evolve and become feasible. Now, it's the most spectacular sequence of the movie.
I really feel like it's a movie that stands on its own. It really doesn't feel like it's trying to set up a story or kind of continue a story.
You felt the way
the Alien franchise was developing, that there wasn't nothing more for that to say. But when he saw an idea behind this universe and this world where he could create something and contribute something new, then he jumped on it.
There are strong references, visual references to the original. Whether ultimately it links the story together is not necessary. It's not necessary that this ticks all the boxes.
I think I'll be allowed to show my face at Comic-Con next year. It was something I was very aware of as being an enormous responsibility to the lexicon of sci-fi iconography.
We began almost 2.5 years ago without a story, without a script, and here we are 2 years later. Is pretty damn good and pretty fast given the scale of the production, and given the fact that I was particularly nervous about returning to the genre after all this time.